This video will be about the history of the Israelites and the true history of the land of Palestine, aiming to expose the Zionist falsification in claiming that the land of Palestine belongs to them. In the beginning, this is an ancient map of Palestine showing the presence of the Canaanites, the earliest people to settle in the land since around 3500 BC. The word Canaanites is derived from Canaan, the son of Ham and grandson of prophet Noah, and the forefather of the Canaanite people. The Canaanites were of Arab origin and belonged to the Semitic peoples, who are descendants of Shem, the son of prophet Noah, peace be upon him. Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, traveled to the land of Canaan in the 18th century BC. Up to that point, the names Palestine, Baalmakti, Jerusalem, Beit al-Maqdis, and the Israelites had not yet appeared. From the lineage of Prophet Abraham came Ishmael and Isaac, peace be upon them. Prophet Ishmael traveled to the Arabian Peninsula, where he lived and got married. Isaac, peace be upon him, traveled to the land of Canaan, and from his descendants came Jacob, peace be upon him. His name in Hebrew is Israel, which means servant of God. His children who came after him were known as the children of Israel, or the children of Jacob, or the sons of the servant of God. And we all know what they did to their brother, Prophet Joseph, peace be upon him, in the story of the well and the wolf, as mentioned in the Holy Quran. Until Prophet Joseph, peace be upon him, became a minister in Egypt, the entire family, along with Prophet Jacob and his sons, came to Egypt and lived there with their brother Joseph. So originally, they were living like a tribe outside the main city in the land of Canaan, and then they moved to Egypt. Their descendants remained in Egypt for 430 years. During that time, the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt by Ahmose I around 1550 BC, marking the transition from Hyksos rule to the rule of the pharaohs. Note, the term pharaohs is historically inaccurate, but this isn't the time to go into that discussion. All this while, the Israelites were still living in Egypt, engaging in everything you can imagine, from sabotaging the economy and corrupting morals to spreading discord, committing murder, looting, and more. In addition, they supported the Hyksos' occupation of Egypt, which explains why Pharaoh and the people of Egypt resented the Israelites. The story related to Pharaoh is that he oppressed the Israelites because of a dream he saw. A child would be born among them who would be the cause of his downfall. This interpretation was mentioned by Ibn Kathir in his writings as a reason for the oppression. However, this does not negate the fact that the main reason for their persecution was their corruption, as stated in both historical records and the Holy Quran. But despite all the corruption they committed in Egypt, God saved them and gave them another chance through Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, in the famous story of the parting of the sea, allowing the Israelites to cross safely. After that, Pharaoh and his army were drowned, and they witnessed Pharaoh die before their very eyes. This took place around the year 1300 BC, and throughout all this time they were not yet called Jews, nor did they have a cause to go to the Holy Land. Even the land of Canaan, the first historical manuscript mentioning them in Egypt, is found in the Temple of Ramses III, where a neighboring people called Peliset, who fought alongside Ramses III around 1150 BC, are mentioned. The name appears repeatedly in several papyri. After the miracle of the parting of the sea and witnessing this miracle, the Israelites saw people worshiping idols. They said to Prophet Moses, "Make for us a god like theirs." This led to the famous story of the worship of the golden calf by the Samaritan, as mentioned in the Quran. Moses then told them, we will go to the land where your ancestors lived, which was the land of Canaan. At that time, the land of Canaan was ruled by a people called the Amalekites, descendants of the Canaanites. They told Moses, "O Moses, there are powerful people in that land, and we will not enter it until they leave. If they leave, then we will enter." Moses replied, "Enter through the gate, and if you enter it, you will be victorious." They said, "We will never enter as long as they are there. You and your Lord go fight while we stay here." So Allah decreed that they wander in the desert for 40 years until that generation passed away. Then came a new generation. By that time, Moses and Aaron had died, and a new prophet named Joshua ibn Nun appeared around 1200 BC. Prophet Joshua led the new generation and entered the Holy Land with them, establishing a kingdom later ruled by Prophet David and Prophet Solomon. When the Israelites entered the Holy Land, the city of Jerusalem was already established and had existed since around 3000 BC, built by a people known as the Jebusites. In the 18th century BC, the city of Jerusalem was called Jebus, and the king who ruled it was named Melchizedek. Later, it was called Ur-Salim, or Mountain of Peace. When the Israelites took control of it, the city became known as Ur-Shalem, and finally Ur-Shalim, as documented in the Egyptian Amarna letters manuscripts that remain to this day. The important point is that from 900 BC to 597 BC, there were the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, along with their holy book, the Torah, which was revealed to prophet Moses, peace be upon him. The children of Israel came to be known as Jews, named after their forefather Judah, son of Jacob, peace be upon him. This means they took over the land of the Canaanites and the Jebusites. Yes, their ancestors had once lived in the land, but their tribe originally lived in the desert, far from urban centers. Prophet Jacob, peace be upon him, did not live in a city, so their ancestors were neither rulers nor the original inhabitants of the cities. After settling in the land, they returned to their old ways of greed, corruption, and spreading evil, even going as far as killing prophets. God would send prophets to them from time to time to remind them of their religion. Their killing of prophets like Prophet Zechariah and Prophet John, peace be upon them, among others not mentioned in the Quran, earned them the title Killers of the Prophets. Then came King Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of the Babylonian Empire, who invaded and occupied Jerusalem and scattered the Jews across various parts of the world. This occurred in the year 597 BC. This is where the name Solomon's Temple appears for the first time. The Jews claim, before we were exiled from the land, Prophet Solomon had built a temple in Jerusalem called the Temple of Solomon, or Solomon's Sanctuary. They further allege that when Nebuchadnezzar came, he destroyed this temple, and that the Philistines, who later inhabited the land, built the city of Jerusalem over this so-called temple. They claim that they have the right to dig beneath Al-Quds, Jerusalem, in search of the so-called temple. As for the Philistines, or Peleshet in Hebrew, they were a people who had lived in the region since the 12th century BC, which is before the arrival of the Israelites with Prophet Joshua ibn Nun around 900 BC. Jerusalem already existed at that time. The Jews claimed that the Philistines were not the original inhabitants of the land, alleging that they came from coastal cities such as the islands of Crete and elsewhere. They say the Philistines split into two groups. One went to Derna in present-day Libya, and the other went to Ashkelon, which is now part of Gaza. Whether they were migrants, as the Jews claim, or Canaanites, as all history books say, the Philistines have historically been the earliest inhabitants of the land. So who truly holds the rightful claim here, according to the facts? Important point is that the Persian king, Cyrus the Great, emerged and defeated the Babylonian Empire, which had been under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar. For the first time, the Persian Empire took control of the land of Jerusalem. This was in the year 539 BC. The Jews then began to return gradually as communities living in specific areas, but without having any form of rule or sovereignty. Then came Alexander the Great with the Macedonian Empire in 332 BC, defeating the Persians and driving them out of the region. He took control of the land. After that, the region came under the rule of the Egyptian Ptolemies and the Syrian Seleucids. This situation lasted for over 400 years, during which the Israelites repeatedly attempted to establish a state or kingdom for themselves in the area once again. But they didn't last more than 80 years before collapsing again, and from this came the term, the curse of the 8th decade. The important point is that the Roman Empire arrived and occupied the region in 63 BC. The Jews were the first to approach the Roman general Pompey the Great, asking him to grant them areas to govern, but under his authority. Until the birth of Christ, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, in Bethlehem, a town located about 10 kilometers south of Jerusalem. Prophet Jesus was born by a divine miracle, as mentioned in the Holy Quran, to a mother without a father. Some Jews falsely claimed that Mary, the Virgin, became pregnant with Jesus, peace be upon him, through Joseph the carpenter. Prophet Jesus was sent with a divine message, but the Jews went to the Roman ruler at the time and told him that the son of Joseph the carpenter, Jesus, was planning a rebellion against him, inciting people and aiming to take over power. Thus, they were the main reason behind the Roman pursuit of Prophet Jesus. This in addition to the persecution that the Jews inflicted upon the Christians as they incited the Romans against them. In the year 324 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great came to power and declared an end to the persecution of Christians. He returned their homes, churches, and wealth to them, officially recognized Christianity, and embraced the Christian faith himself. When the Christians regained their properties and the state became Christian, retaliation against the Jews began. The Jews fled from Palestine and dispersed across the world. Some went to Europe, others to Africa, and some settled in Medina in the Arabian Peninsula. This explains the presence of Jews in Medina during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the emergence of Islam in 610 AD. The reason for their presence there is that they had arrived in the Arabian Peninsula nearly 200 years earlier, seeking refuge from the dark history and persecution they would have faced had they returned to Roman-ruled Palestine. Note, in the Torah, the Jews mention the phrase, God came from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran. The Holy One here refers to the final prophet who would come at the end of time and who would be sent from the region of Paran. Therefore, their migration to Paran, which lies in the Tihama region of the Hijaz, Western Arabia, had a religious background and was not just a random relocation. The important point is that the well-known Jewish tribes mentioned in Islamic history were based in Medina, such as Banu Kainuka, Banu Qurayza, and Banu Nadir. Even Safiya bint Huyay, may Allah be pleased with her, who became the wife of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was from Banu Nadir. The Prophet once told her, "Your father was a prophet, your uncle was a prophet, and now you are the wife of a prophet." Not all Jews living in the Arabian Peninsula at that time were from the children of Israel. There were also Arab Jews who had converted to Judaism, such as Banu Auf and Banu Kainuka, who were Arab converts to Judaism. Banu Nadir were of mixed origin. Thus, the issue of Arab Zionists living among us today is not something new. It has historical roots. Even the Arab poet Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf was one of the Jews of Banu al-Nadir in Medina. The Jews in Medina lived in Yathrib, now Medina, as well as in Khaybar, Wadi al-Qura, and Taima. At that time, the message of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had begun in Mecca and had been ongoing for 4 years. The Persian king Khosrow II ordered an attack on the Byzantines in Jerusalem in the year 614 AD, and he succeeded in expelling them from the city. It was in this context that the Meccan verse was revealed. Alif Lam Mim, the Romans have been defeated. The Quraysh rejoiced and mocked Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, saying, "Our fellow idol worshippers have defeated the people of the book." The Jews took part in this Persian war, joining forces with the Persians to take revenge on the Arab Christians and the Byzantines. However, just 3 years later, the Persians turned against them and expelled them. Less than 10 years after that, the Byzantine army returned and achieved major victories over the Persians. Emperor Heraclius entered with his army and reclaimed all the lost territories in the year 627 AD, just 13 years after the initial Persian victory. At that time, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had already migrated to Medina with his companions in the year 622 AD. After a series of events, Prophet Muhammad achieved victory in the Battle of Badr, the Great Battle. Before that, there had already been a connection between Muslims and Al-Masjid al-Aqsa through the story of Al-Isra and Al-Miraj, which took place in Mecca before the Hijra, migration. It was the miraculous night journey of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from Mecca to Jerusalem. The deeper connection came when Muslims were first instructed to face Al-Masjid al-Aqsa as their Qibla, direction of prayer, at the beginning of the obligation of prayer. All of this happened before the Prophet had any direct confrontation with the Jews while he was still in Mecca. Later, he migrated to Medina, where Jewish tribes had strong economic influence. Banu Kainuka controlled the gold trade and its markets, Banu al-Nadir managed agriculture, and Banu Qurayza were involved in various industries, including weapon manufacturing. Thus, the Jews were a major economic force in Medina. After the Prophet, peace be upon him, settled in the city, one of his first decisions was to establish a marketplace for the Muslims. near the Prophet's mosque, inclusive of the Muhajirun, Ansar, and Khazraj. After the Jews rejected the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his message, just as they had rejected Prophet Jesus and other prophets before, their religious rejection was now paired with an economic threat due to the new Muslim market. The situation escalated further due to the religious threat posed by al-Isra and al-Miraj and the change of Qibla toward Jerusalem. As a result, Banu Kainuka started rebellious acts against the Prophet, which led to their expulsion from Medina. Later, Banu al-Nadir attempted to assassinate the Prophet, and he ordered them to leave the city as well. Then came the betrayal of Banu Qurayza during the Battle of the Trench al-Azab, and they were punished by being expelled from Medina. Eventually, the matter concluded with the Battle of Khaybar, which marked the end of Jewish influence in Medina and the departure of the remaining Jewish groups. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in 632 AD, and the rule of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, may Allah be pleased with him, until 634 AD, French fried, came the caliphate of Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him. It was during his reign that Muslims officially entered the Holy Land, and Jerusalem was peacefully conquered in the year 636 AD. When Umar ibn al-Khattab entered Jerusalem and received the keys to the city from the patriarch Sophronius, he said his famous words to Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah: "We are a people whom Allah has honored with Islam, and if we seek honor through anything else, Allah will humiliate us." After receiving the keys and officially bringing Jerusalem under Muslim rule, Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, allowed both Jews and Christians to remain in the city. There is some disagreement among historians as to whether Jews were allowed only to visit the city or to live in it as well. However, what's important is that when the Muslims entered Jerusalem, there was not a single Jew living in the city. The Umayyan covenant remained in effect throughout the various Islamic caliphates, Umayyad, Abbasid, and Ottoman, until relatively recently, with the fall of the Ottoman Empire during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II in 1909. After being expelled from the Arabian Peninsula, the Jews dispersed and migrated northward. For example, during the Islamic conquest of Iraq in 655 AD, there were about 90,000 Jews living there, in addition to those who had previously fled the Byzantines and migrated to Europe, including Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, Greece, and Macedonia. Others went to Africa, settling in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco, while some migrated as far as Russia. Thus, Jerusalem remained under Muslim rule, with Christian communities living in the city and practicing their religion freely, along with Jewish communities, whether small resident groups or visiting pilgrims, who would come to worship at their sacred sites. In 1099 AD, the First Crusade took place, and Jerusalem was captured from the Muslims. Despite their claims regarding the so-called Temple of Solomon, the Jews showed no reaction. Later, Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi, Saladin, returned and defeated the Crusaders in the Battle of Hattin in 1187 AD, yet the Jews still had no reaction. In fact, Saladin ordered the reconstruction of the Jewish synagogue that had been destroyed by the Crusaders, who had burned Jews alive inside it. Saladin even allowed the Jews to live in Jerusalem peacefully once again. Thus, Jerusalem returned to Muslim rule in 1187 AD at the hands of Salah al-Din after the Battle of Hattin. It remained under Muslim rule from 1187 to 1948 AD, meaning from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, until 1948, with the exception of 90 years, during which it was under Crusader control. The Crusader campaigns against Jerusalem did not stop. In 1147 AD, the Second Crusade was launched but ended at the gates of Damascus and never reached Jerusalem. In 1191 came the Third Crusade. In 1202, the Fourth Crusade. In 1217, the Fifth Crusade. In 1228, the Sixth Crusade. In 1248, the Seventh Crusade. And in 1270, the Eighth Crusade. The Jews who lived under the Ottoman Caliphate were a minority, but they lived normally, engaging in trade and practicing their religion freely. Even during the Fatimid Caliphate, a Jewish governor was appointed over the region of Greater Syria, which reflects the coexistence between Muslims and Jews during that time. However, if you look back at the various countries where the Jews lived, even Britain, which now supports them, once forced Jews to wear yellow badges for identification and banned people from dealing with them in 1275 AD. King Edward I of England executed hundreds of them and expelled all Jews from England in 1290 AD. Russia had persecuted the Jews and banned them from living in certain areas, isolating them from the rest of the population. The oppression reached the point of massacres, prompting Tsar Alexander III to drive them out. As a result, around 2 million Jews migrated from Russia to Europe and America between 1880 and 1920. Even Europe could not tolerate them. The Jews were expelled during the reign of King Charles II of Hungary in 1349 AD. France expelled them several times, the last being under King Henry IV in 1592 AD. Spain and Portugal expelled them in 1492 AD, during the Inquisition under King Philip IV of Spain and Portugal. Italy expelled the Jews in 1567 AD. Switzerland expelled them 4 times, the last being in 1701 AD. Germany expelled the Jews in 1570 AD. They were also expelled from Lithuania and Czechia, Bohemia. Even Britain expelled the Jews more than once. In contrast, in Arab and Muslim lands, the Jews thrived. Their trade flourished in Yemen. They lived peacefully in Libya, prospered in Morocco, and earned profits in Egypt and Iraq without facing any major issues. This clearly highlights the vast difference between how the West treated the Jews and how they were treated by the Arabs and Muslims. The important point is that up until World War I, the situation of the Jews around the world remained as described, scattered and often persecuted, until the emergence of Theodor Herzl. He was born on May 2, 1860, of Austro-Hungarian origin, and was a Jewish writer, poet, and political activist. Theodor Herzl became a wealthy man and a journalist. He owned a Jewish newspaper, but he had no real interest in the Jewish religion and didn't even speak Hebrew. He barely knew 2 words of the language. However, he possessed 2 powerful tools: a bank and a newspaper, meaning money and media. About 100 years before Herzl, a group of Protestant Christians emerged in England who believed that for Christ to return, the Jews must first return to Mount Zion, as this was part of the prophetic vision. This means that their motivation was religious, and Mount Zion is located in Jerusalem. In contrast to what the Protestants believed, there were some Jewish sects that rejected the idea. They argued that if we return and gather in one place based on our own prophecy, it will lead to our collective destruction. This belief gave rise to a movement called Neturei Karta, which rejects the occupation and participates in protests against Zionists alongside Muslims. Theodor Herzl came and created a blend between the Protestant Christian prophecy and the Jewish sects that supported the idea of gathering in one place after the diaspora. He took the idea from the movement called Lovers of Zion, Hovevai Zion, and using his financial and media influence, he convinced the Jews who were already inclined to believe in the idea of returning. From 1870 to 1897, the Lovers of Zion, Hovevai Zion organizations promoted the same idea later adopted by Theodor Herzl, but only in a theoretical and not a practical form. That changed with the major event, the First Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, on August 29, 1897, led by Theodor Herzl himself. He invested his wealth, leveraged his media influence, and was supported by powerful partners such as the Rothschild family. The conference produced what became known as the Basel Program, which focused on the idea of establishing a national homeland for the Jews anywhere in the world. Palestine was mentioned as the primary goal, but they also proposed other countries such as Argentina and Uganda as potential alternatives if the Palestine plan failed. Herzl sent a letter to Sultan Abdulhamid II stating that the Jews wanted a land to live in within Palestine in exchange for writing off the Ottoman Empire's debts, which amounted to millions, as well as depositing additional millions into the state treasury. At that time, Palestine already had Jewish residents, but they made up no more than 2.8% of the total population. The important point is that Sultan Abdulhamid II completely rejected the offer. He said to Philip Nulinsky, the envoy who delivered Herzl's message, "I will not give up a single inch of Palestine because it is not mine to give. Let the Jews keep their millions. If my empire is torn apart, they may be able to take Palestine for free, but as long as I am alive, I will never agree to it." And this is exactly what happened, unfortunately, during World War I in 1914 and before the complete fall of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. The first decision made after the fall of the Ottoman state was to abolish the law that prohibited Jewish settlement in Palestine. At that time, there was the famous plan to divide areas of control between France and Britain, known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, signed in 1916. And after the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1917, Arthur Balfour issued the Balfour Declaration, promising the establishment of a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine. In the same year, 1917, the British Army entered Palestine under the command of General Edmund Allenby. Note, the Balfour Declaration, issued by the British Foreign Office, was not addressed to any official entity, but rather to Lord Lionel de Rothschild, a friend of Theodor Herzl and one of the most prominent wealthy Jews in Britain, who played a significant role in advancing Herzl's plan after his death on July 3rd, 1904. At the same time, Britain was inciting Sharif Hussein in the Arabian Peninsula with what became known as the Great Deception, claiming that they would support him in overthrowing the Ottoman Empire in exchange for helping transfer the seat of the Caliphate to the Arabian Peninsula. After that, Britain also incited Abdulaziz al-Saud to fight Sharif Hussein, who had played a role in toppling the Ottoman Empire, and then began demanding the establishment of an Arab caliphate. This is the well-known story of Lawrence of Arabia and the salaries that were later revealed, showing that payments were being made to the al-Saud family by the British. Massacres were carried out, all with British weapons and coordination, as part of a broader restructuring of the entire region. Britain occupied Palestine and labeled it the British Mandate, instead of calling it the British occupation in 1924, the same year the Ottoman Caliphate officially fell and Jewish immigration to Palestine began. Funding then began to buy land from Palestinians, but the vast majority refused to sell. Meanwhile, Jewish immigration to Palestine continued. At this point, Hitler emerged during World War II and began persecuting Jews throughout Germany, carrying out the famous Holocaust, though there is controversy and misinformation regarding the estimated number of victims, which is said to be 2 million. But this is not the time to discuss that. Here, the Zionists took advantage of the situation and told the Jews, "Come to Palestine." This is a photo of Jewish refugees arriving at the shores of Palestine in 1947 with a banner on the ship that read, "The Germans destroyed our families and homes. Don't destroy our hopes." At that time, Palestine was still under the British Mandate, occupation. Even though Britain was the one that helped the Jews immigrate, in addition to issuing the Balfour Declaration, why then did the Zionists write that message on the ship? Quite simply, it was because of the Palestinian resistance, which had begun from the very first day of the Zionist plans, especially with the Great Arab Revolt that erupted in 1936, following the martyrdom of Izz al-Din al-Qassam in 1935. Because of the Palestinian resistance, Britain issued orders to reduce Jewish immigration to Palestine. In fact, some Jewish immigrants were even turned back from the shores of Palestine due to the intense pressure from the Palestinian resistance. At that time, the number of Zionists who had entered Palestine reached about 22% of the total population. The ships transporting them to Palestine were linked to Haganah gangs, along with the Irgun, a Zionist armed group equipped with modern weapons from Britain, the United States, and several European countries. The Irgun and Haganah carried out what seemed like retaliation operations and massacres against Palestinians right in front of Herbert Samuel, the British High Commissioner in Palestine. It was later revealed that Herbert Samuel, the British official ruling Palestine, was of Jewish origin. The Palestinian and Arab resistance continued, despite the disparity in experience, training, and weaponry. Great figures emerged from this struggle, such as the Syrian hero Izz al-Din al-Qassam. The Palestinian resistance has persisted from day one and continues to this very day. In 1947, Britain withdrew from Palestine and handed it over to the Zionists, whose numbers had reached around 580,000, making up about 40% of the population. By then, they had already established weapons factories on the ground and had taken control of all key leadership positions. On May 14, 1948, the Zionists issued the declaration of the occupation state, and David Ben-Gurion was appointed as the first prime minister of this entity. Shortly after, the United States officially recognized their state, followed by Iran, then the Soviet Union, and later many other countries in succession. On May 11, 1949, the United Nations accepted Israel's membership as a recognized state out of nothing. In 1948, the Nakba catastrophe took place, displacing thousands of Palestinians, which allowed Israel to take control of nearly the entire land of Palestine. In 1967, Israel seized an even larger portion of Palestinian land, and the Arab rulers remained silent until the map of Palestine ended up in its current form. At the end of the video, I'll leave you with a clip of the speech by David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of the Zionist entity, delivered on May 14, 1948, in which he declared the establishment of the so-called Zionist state. See you in a new video.
שישי, ה' באייר תש"ח, 14 במאי 1948, אחר הצהריים, באו המוזמנים אל בניין מוזיאון תל אביב בשדרות רוטשילד 16. הם התבקשו לשמור את סיבת ההזמנה, טקס הכרזת העצמאות, לסוד. אבל בבואם מצאו את חצי העיר ממתינה להם. סמוך לשעה 4 הגיע דוד בן גוריון. כל חייו היו מסע אל הרגע הזה.
זוהי זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית, אשר תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים. לפיכך נתכנסנו אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ותוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. מתוך ביטחון בצור ישראל הננו חותמים בחתימת ידינו לעדות על הכרזה זו.